Yo, welcome to Six Layers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sixth Layer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? We love this guy. We love his work. He's a talented writer in both television and comics. Let the people know who we got, man.
Today, we have comic writer and Eisner Award nominee, Tim Sheridan, joining us. But before we chat with Tim, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest is nominated for Eisner for his work on Alan Scott Green Lantern. He has also written the Reign of Superman animated movie, I love that, and co-wrote Flashpoint Beyond. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Slam, we bring to you writer Tim Sheridan. What up, Tim?
Hi, how you doing? Thank you so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, man, I always love you, man. This is I think, my second interview. The first time was with Jeremy Adams, and so now it's just you, and you're flossing the DC mug on me. Oh, man, let's just dive in. So, Tim, you started off writing for television before comics. What did you have to learn in order to write comics? Was there a learning curve there?
Oh, my gosh. First of all, and I say this is not like false humility or anything like that. I say this as a person who somehow finds himself, going to the Eisner Awards this year as a nominee, but I still feel like I don't know the first thing about writing comics. I still feel like I always, part of that is I approach everything that way. Like, I just want to learn how to do whatever I'm doing better. And so I never feel like I know what I'm doing. I'm here to absorb and learn more and figure out how to get better at it. But I put me in front of my computer writing a screenplay, and I am much more at home than I am writing comics, which is a strange feeling. But I wonder if it will always be that way. I don't know. I mean, I've been writing more comics lately in the last few years, so maybe it's going to get to a point where I sit down to write a screenplay and I feel like, wait, how do I do this again? But the big thing that I realized this recently, the big difference between writing for comics and writing for animation in particular, which is where my career has always been, it's actors. I miss actors. There's something magical that actor, maybe this is because I went to drama school, but there's something magical I think that actors bring to the work in animation, voice actors, that is sometimes it makes it feel like your writing is even better because they give a really good line reading on something that you maybe didn't think too much about, and so it's another piece of the collaborative process that's kind of missing in comics, and so I miss that. I hear voices in my head when I'm writing. I hear the voices of the characters is what I mean. But I do. But it's not. It's just there's that piece that's missing for me when I work in comics.
You also wrote the animated 2-part adaptation of Batman: The Long Halloween, and so I wanted to ask you what went into the decision process of what story beats from the comic that you threw in the movie. What was that process like?
That was a really great process. I didn't. I had worked on my first job in television was on a animated series of like 11-minute cartoons called Justice League Action, which is such a good show. If you could find it and watch it, please, because you're going to be happy. You're going to thank me for pointing you to it. But then they asked me if I would work on what they termed Death of Superman Part 2. And I said, oh, you mean Reign of the Supermen? And they were like, oh, you're obviously the guy to do this. So they hired me to do that. And that was part of the universe of movies that began with Flashpoint Paradox and ended with Apocalypse War. And so after that, the next opportunity that presented itself was The Long Halloween, which was for so long this third rail among Warner Animation producers. They didn't want to make it. They felt like it was unadaptable to the screen, and it wasn't something they wanted to do until finally Butch Lukic, who is a legendary animation
the great Butch Lukic, yes.
Yeah, Butch had a chance to do a movie. They said, will you do Long Halloween? And he said, yeah, I'll do it. And I had worked with him on Justice League Action with Jim Krieg, the producer, and they asked me if I would do Long Halloween. So when I was a huge, like most people, a huge fan of that series, of that book. And so I sat down to start outlining it, and it was only supposed to be one movie. And the first night I sat down and started sketching it out, and I started realizing, wait, if this is one movie, and I started doing the math, and I said, it means there's going to have to be, because it's based on the calendar and holidays and murders that happen on holidays, there's going to have to be a murder like every minute and a half or 2 minutes in this movie in order for it to tell the story. And I said, that's not a movie anymore, it's a snuff film. And so I went back the next day into Warner Animation, and I said, you guys, I got to make 2 movies at least. We can't do this in one movie. And they said, oh, I made my case. They said, okay. They went to the executives, they run the studio, and they said, yeah, let's do 2 movies. And I mean, that's a huge thing, like to double your entire budget and your workload like that. That doesn't happen ever. And I think it was just because everybody on board felt like, creatively, it was the right thing to do. If we're going to do this, we have to do it justice. And so luckily I got to do that. Choosing kind of what ended up in the adaptation and what we left in the book, that was a tough road. I mean, there's one big important character and story beat that's not in the movie. And a lot of people, there were a lot of people online who were like, how could you leave this out? This is a huge, important issue. And this character, I'll say it, was the Riddler, was an important thing. And I just would tell those folks, I'm like, go back and read the book again. That book came out monthly over the course of, 13 months or whatever. And that issue that comes in the middle, the April Fool's Day issue. And it's basically, it serves as a recap of everything that's happened up till that point, mostly. And there's good stuff in it, but it would have stopped the movie dead. And those are the kind of decisions you have to make. You're like, look, this thing, it's great for the comics. It's great for the way the comics were released. It was important and necessary. But in the movie, we got to keep going. Like we're on the train now, and we got to get to the next thing. And so it was a tough choice. But I decided in the outline to leave it out, and then everybody read it and they said, yeah, that's the right way to go. And we all decided that was the way to do it. But the good news is that I wrote a short film that was supposed to accompany the release of the movie that would have been like a missing scene, a deleted beat, which was called April's Fool. And it was the Riddler beat, but expanded and altered a little bit to fit our movie more. And unfortunately, they ran out of budget and weren't able to produce it and include it in the movie. So there's a script out there for that beat, but it didn't make it into the film.
Tim, before or during or after your creative process, did you have any feedback from Jeph Loeb about writing the Long Halloween movie? I know you have a funny story with Jeremy.
It's the worst thing. Yeah, it's the worst thing. It was, I asked the producers in the very beginning, I said, look, will I have a chance to talk to Jeph Loeb, who I didn't know and had never met at that point? And they said, we'll get back to you on that. We'll get back to you on that. And I just kind of waited. And I was still pretty new in the world of Warner Brothers animation and DC stuff. And so I, was a good soldier, and I waited. But eventually they said, yeah, we just, we don't think it's the right thing to put you in touch with Jeph. And I think their reasoning was that by the time that they had, I can only guess, I think it was by the time we'd gotten to that point, we were already so far down the road creatively that I think they were nervous that Jeph might throw a wrench into the plan that we had. And so they made a decision not to put me together with him. I then made a decision to not try to reach out to him myself because I didn't want to, rock the boat. And I regret it wholeheartedly because I did have a chance to finally meet Jeph Loeb. Actually, when I was working with Jeff Johns on Flashpoint Beyond, one day Jeph came into the writer's room with me and Jeremy, and he said, hey, you know what? My friend Jeph Loeb, he really liked your Long Halloween movie. And I said, no, he didn't. What are you talking about? Because to me, it's like, that's his baby. Like, of course he didn't. Of course he wouldn't like it. Even if it was good, he'd probably have a lot of criticism because it's his baby and somebody took it and made it into something else. You know, that's how I think I would feel. So he said, no. Jeph was like, no, he told me he liked it. And so I was a little skeptical, I was a little nervous, but Jeph Johns is very honest and forthright. And I thought, okay, well, maybe he's telling the truth. And then it was a year or two later, I was on a plane on my way to New York Comic Con, and I saw Jeph Loeb sitting in first class as I was making my way to steerage in the back. And I had a whole line of people behind me. And I thought, I swear he looked up at me and recognized me. And I thought, oh God, what am I going to do? Like, I can't stop in the aisle with all these people boarding this plane and like have my first meeting with Jeph Loeb be this. I can't do that. Like, what do I do? So I just like looked down and I averted my eyes. I was scared out of my mind. And so I went and sat in my seat. And when I got to New York Comic Con, I told Jeremy Adams, my good friend, I said, oh, here, you got to hear what happened to me. And he's like, what's wrong with you? Go talk to Jeph Loeb. He's here. Go like, and I was like, I don't know. I'm nervous. I can't. Jeremy and I then on like Saturday of the con, we were walking along Artist Alley and Jeph Loeb walks up and Jeremy's like, hey, Jeph Loeb, I'm Jeremy Adams. This is Tim Sheridan. He adapted The Long Halloween. and Jeph Loeb, I was terrified of how he would be, but he was incredibly kind and gracious, and we had a very warm, friendly exchange. I saw him again in another couple of shows. A fan, when he and I were both signing autographs at a show, separate and like different sides of the room, and a fan brought the Blu-ray of Long Halloween and had him sign it, and then brought it to me and had me sign it too, which was the coolest thing that's ever happened to me, I think. And they were like, sign it anywhere. And I said, well, I'm not signing it above Jeff's name. Like, so I like found a spot below his name, like, and wrote it smaller, Tim Sheridan.
Let's talk about the book that everyone's talking about. Tell us your experience on writing Alan Scott Green Lantern, and what does it mean to you that it's nominated for an Eisner?
I mean, the Eisner thing, the GLAAD Award nomination was huge. And then, the Eisner Award nomination was a complete and total shock. It's wild. You look at the nominees in that category too. It's like the greatest people in this business, at the top of their game. So it is absolutely the greatest honor, for me and for the rest of the team. I mean, I've talked to everybody on the team. We're all beside ourselves. The book is something that was it's very personal and very special to all of us who worked on it. And so to have that kind of recognition, to be nominated and held up with the likes of Tom and James and Ram and Mariko, it's absolutely incredible. That book only happened, once again, I'll mention my friend Jeph Johns. I mean, it happened because of Jeph. We did Flashpoint Beyond, and we teased the idea of this Red Lantern character at the end of the book, the Golden Age Red Lantern. And Jeph, meanwhile, went off and pitched a series of books called The New Golden Age to DC. I wasn't there for that. And they, eventually they greenlighted 3 of them, and one of them was Alan Scott. And Jeph called me and he said, hey, you greenlighted this book. I think you should write it. And he said, do you have a story? And I said, I don't know. Do I have a story? And then he and I got to chatting about it. We talked about the Red Lantern as the way in, and we talked about, him being the Soviets' answer to the Green Lantern. And, we were lucky that he had introduced this idea that people had been removed from the timeline and were put back into the timeline. So the Red Lantern would be this character who we have read the history of Alan Scott and never seen this character before. How could you have never met the arch nemesis of the original Green Lantern? Well, it's because he was removed from the timeline, and then now he's back. So now we're going to see the story as it was always supposed to play out. That was the conceit. And for me, the opportunity to go back to 1930, the 1930s and 1940, to the origin of the character, and explore his POV and the perspective of him being a closeted gay man in that time period. It was very meaningful and important for me, and I think it's also a way to sort of talk about the history of people like me, and our life and experiences in this country and in this world. The things that Alan goes through in this book are things that are still happening today, and so to do something that was honest and true, but could have a lot of superhero fun and big twists and turns and superpowers and excitement, that was, one of the greatest challenges and one of the greatest things I've gotten to work on. I'm very, very grateful for it. And the fact that it's getting recognition, I think it's because everyone who came into the book came in with their hearts full and, ready to tell an honest, fun, sometimes gut-wrenching story.
And this is your first Eisner nod, right?
Yes. In fact, pretty much like everybody, I think most people in the book, it's their first, I say first, like as if there might be another one. I mean, I can't even think of that.
Well, we think you're gonna get another one. I
I appreciate it, but let me tell you, like it's, it's a huge thing. It's, and I was actually thinking about not going to San Diego this year. I was like, maybe for the first time in like 25 years, I'll, not go. And then this happened. I'm like, well, I guess I gotta go.
All right, so I want to ask a hot topic question surrounding Alan Scott, and that's Alan Scott's sexuality. And you kind of hit on it a second ago, Tim. Why do you think fanboys complain about Alan Scott so much? Is it because he's gay, or is it because DC retconned him gay because he's a golden age character?
It's a great question. The thing that, well, first of all, I think it's hard to lump everybody who has had notes about this into one category, because I think there are bad actors out there who, are just for political reasons, people who want to say like, anti-woke, anti-DEI stuff. And they have a political message that they're trying, and they leverage things like, this book to get that out. I get that. That's fine. But I can ignore those guys. Or better yet, I can sort of use their outrage to help raise awareness of the book and try to get people to buy it. But there are legitimately a lot of fans who I think had legitimate questions about that. And here's why I think it happened. This is what I think. Alan we had a version of Alan who was out of the closet and gay in Earth 2 during New 52, right?
Right.
And then that universe ended, and we're back in the Prime universe, and Alan Scott, exists. And I don't think we had ever seen a character that existed in a different part of the multiverse with a different sexual orientation. I don't think we've ever seen that. And so I think James Tynion, or somebody at DC said, hey, it probably is the right thing to do to have Alan Scott in the Prime universe come out of the closet if he was gay in this other universe. And so James wrote a short few pages in Infinite Frontier that had him come out of the closet to Jade and Obsidian, but I think Obsidian knew. And so here's where the problem came in. It was just a few pages in the middle of Infinite Frontier, and there wasn't a larger story. There wasn't context. There wasn't anything, they didn't jump into like, let's do an Alan Scott story, and let's tell you more about why we're giving you this information, why it's important to know about the character. And so that, but look, DC was going through a lot of changes during that period. I mean, just so much stuff going on. Maybe they dropped the ball a little bit for a short time, and I think it made fans cynical. I think they were like, oh, did you just do this for a press hit? Was this just a publicity thing? And I get that. Like, I feel the same way. I think at the time I was like, interesting. Why isn't there a story about this? And And so one of the greatest gratifying things that's happened is, I travel around talking about this book, signing autographs for, in books and stuff for people at different shows all around the world. And I can't tell you, almost every single show I go to, at least one person comes up to me, one guy, it's always a guy, comes up to me and says, it just had it happen, by the way, in Philly last weekend, says to me, I was really against, this is usually the word they use. I think what they really are trying to say is they were suspicious about it. But he says, I was really against that change that DC made with this character. And, but then I read your book. And now I get it. And I'm on board. And I really loved the book. And thank you. And I hear that all the time, which is a great thing for us those of us who made the book. Because I feel like, so we did our job,
Right.
We made you like the story, we made you like the character, we even made you like what people have been calling a retcon. But I do have another thing to say about that, which is that these characters are so real to me. I mean, there's a line that the Spectre has in issue 3 where he's talking about God, and he says, hey, by the way, I'm not all that spiritual. Like, he's like, it sounds weird, but he's like, God is an actual person to me. Like, he's in my head. Like, I hear him. I hear his voice talking to me. Like, he's a real thing. This isn't just conceptual. And that's how these characters are for a lot of us, for a lot of fans, and for a lot of creators. Like, Alan Scott is kind of a real guy to me. And so I always feel like when people are shouting retcon, retcon, retcon about him, I try to help them understand. And I say, look, I know it feels like a retcon, but if Alan Scott was your uncle or your dad or your grandfather, and late in life, he told you something about himself, something like this, that he'd kept a secret his whole life and had lived a different life to try and hide it, you wouldn't scream retcon in his face. Hopefully you'd be caring, and you'd be, you'd be loving and warm to them. But even if you weren't, you certainly wouldn't say it was a retcon. You'd say, oh, well, you never told me that. Now I know. And that's how I feel about Alan. That's how I feel about any character like that. It's new information that he didn't give you before. And there were reasons for it. He was coming of age in the 30s and 40s. I mean, it was not safe. He's the most powerful hero in the world. And he's terrified and feels unsafe to be who he is, proudly and openly. And that a lot of people still feel that way. And so the idea with this book was to show them that there is light, in the darkness, and that, to use a commonly used phrase, it gets better.
Wonderful answer. Thank you for answering that for us, man. Great.
Thanks for asking.
Okay. Let's talk about Masters of the Universe Revolution. Tim, I think we're around the same age.
Yeah.
Tell these youngsters, man, how popular He-Man was back in the 80s, man. It was everything, man. Tell them, man.
I mean, everything was He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. The animated show was huge. We had She-Ra, which was, the spin-off of He-Man, which was supposed to be, I think, targeted for girls, but it was, which also, speaking of things being cynical, but that's kind of how people thought back then, because it was a toy company. They're like, well, we have boys' toys and we have girls' toys. But the thing was, we all watched She-Ra. Like, admit it. Like, we all watched She-Ra because it was all part of the same canon, and we, maybe we didn't get all the She-Ra toys the way we got all the He-Man ones, but some of us had a few. So it was huge. And then the movie happened in 87, and then even later, the 2000 series, and it's just, He-Man's been around for over 40 years. It's been a huge thing. And it's, the fact that we got to come back to it and sort of let the thing grow up with us. The showrunner's Kevin Smith, who is another guy that I didn't know until I was sitting in his living room on the first day of working on this TV show together. Fell absolutely head over heels in love with the man. He's an incredible man and an unbelievably talented writer. He's so talented. He's so good at this. And I don't think, he plays the buffoon all the time. And I'm like, people have no idea how good this guy is, but he's really, really good. And so we got to sort of make it grow up with us a little bit, bring some Shakespearean stakes into the franchise, and you know, we took a little flack in the first few episodes because we were killing people, you know. But look, I always feel like you guys have done this a long time. It's like when your main characters die in the first episode, do you really think they're going to stay dead? Come on, just sit with the story. Come along for the ride, you know. But no, we had the greatest time. It was a lot of fun.
When I first interviewed you, Tim, you mentioned being a fan of Marv Wolfman and how no kid back in the day knew who Marv Wolfman was. Okay, so that got me thinking. If you were to make a Mount Rushmore of DC writers, who would you put on it?
Well, that's a really good question, and I would say, obviously, you know, Marv is right up there. By the way, Marv was the reason why I understood that a writer was a thing, was because you couldn't help but remember his name when you saw it. He's got such an interesting name, Marv Wolfman. You know, it's like this. You know, I was like, I kept seeing that over and over again. I'm like, wait a minute, writer? This guy's writing this stuff. But I just had an opportunity at a show to spend an evening. I had dinner with another one who would be up there on Mount Rushmore. And I always say I have two shirts that I will wear around town. I have a shirt that says created by Marv Wolfman, and I have a shirt that says created by Frank Miller.
Okay.
Because Frank Miller, I know it's a really effed up way to get into Batman, but the first ever Batman book I ever read was Dark Knight Returns. And so I got to meet Frank and hang out with him, and it was one of the most incredible nights of my life. He gave me some unreal advice out of nowhere too, which was amazing. So I think, yeah.
So you got Marv, Frank.
I would have Frank. I would also have Denny O'Neil.
Denny O'Neil.
You know, these are the people I think that made me. You know, I think you know, in the modern age, you know, I'm crazy about my fellow nominee in my category, Tom King. You know, I think he deserves a place up there. And Mark Waid, just because.
Oh yeah, God.
You know, first of all, just one of the greatest of all time, but also just a repository of DC you know, history and information and comics. If there was comic book Jeopardy, nobody would ever beat him.
Yeah.
So we got Marv Wolfman, Denny O'Neil, Frank Miller. I know Mark is happy, and then Mark Waid or Tom King. You got to pick one.
I got to pick one.
Yeah, because it's four heads.
Well, here's the thing: if I don't say Tom King, then it looks like I'm being not being gracious to a fellow nominee. So let's put Tom King up there and say, you know, Mark Waid is the next one we'll add when we can add another.
All right.
Mark Waid's the Statue of Liberty in comics. those four guys are the Mount Rushmore.
Okay. You know, let me tell you something. This is a really hard question because, like, there are so many writers and creators and artists. You know, I mean, we're talking about writers right now, but there are so many people who, you know, maybe did a couple of really amazing DC runs, a couple of DC stories that are important and seminal, but we don't necessarily think of being on the Mount Rushmore for DC. But you know, but I mean, there are people that I would personally have up on a pedestal. One of them is my friend. The person who has become my friend is Steve Orlando. Steve Orlando, his Midnighter book changed everything I thought I knew about comics and made me invigorated and excited to jump in and write comics. And so I'm crazy about that guy. I really love his work. And you know, if there's more room somewhere on Mount Rushmore, I'm going to put him up there too.
Shout out to Steve Orlando.
Tim, we have two more questions. Your issue of Star Trek Lower Decks just came out. Tell us the premise behind Star Trek Lower Decks and how is that different from the Star Trek series? And were you always familiar with Star Trek?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm a huge Star Trek fan my whole life. The Star Trek original cast movies were in theaters regularly when I was a kid, and they were running the original series reruns on TV. So I was watching all that. I was buying the DC comics that were all based in the original cast movie universe, and then Next Generation came out when I was a kid, and so it was. And then Deep Space Nine, Voyager. It was just like constant.
So you're a real fan. You're a real fan.
Injected into my eyeballs all the time. I was reading novels all the time, everything. Like I was just crazy Star Trek fan.
Wow.
But I've never, of all the IP, of all the licenses and brands that I've gotten to work on, and there have been quite a few that meant so much to me growing up and in my adulthood. I never got to do Star Trek. And then I was at a show with Heather Antos, and I met her for the first time. We got to chatting. I think we really hit it off. And she asked me, she's like, what's your favorite era of Star Trek? And I'm like, whoa, that is such a complicated question. That's like asking me who's the Mount Rushmore of DC writer. So I told her, like, well, first of all, like the original cast movies are like my way in originally. And so that's, way up there for me because of those comics when I was a kid, especially. But I said, but right now, the greatest Star Trek, this is a couple of years ago, I said, the greatest Star Trek on TV currently out there in the world is Lower Decks, which is the animated series on Paramount Plus. And it is at once a comedy kind of set in the Next Generation era, but it's also this love letter to the entire history and canon of Star Trek. So it's a show absolutely built for fans, and the fans who kind of crack jokes about Star Trek all the time. And really, you have to know Star Trek really well to get a lot of the jokes, a lot of the background jokes. Now, having said that, my husband has never seen anything from Star Trek ever, except Lower Decks, and he loves it. It's like one of his favorite shows. So I think he's, proves that you actually don't have to be a huge Star Trek nerd to really love that show.
No John Luke Picard, nothing.
It's not his thing. Believe me, it's a real problem in this marriage. We're coming to terms with it.
This means nothing to him. Live long and prosper.
It does only from Lower Decks. He gets it from Lower Decks. So Heather, an opportunity came up on Lower Decks to follow Ryan North, who did the first 6 issues. And I said, oh, well, that's going to be easy. Just follow one of the greatest who's out there right now. And so I said, yeah, I have to do it because it's Star Trek. So, let me do it. And it's Lower Decks, which I just love. So I've gotten to write some issues. I've written 6 issues. I just turned in my last of the 6-issue arc this past week. And it's weird. Like my version of Lower Decks, it's still Lower Decks, but it's a little weird. I mean, it's comics, it's not animation, so it's a little bit different there. But I'm having a lot of fun with these characters and the voices of these characters. Having a ton of fun. Issue 12 is going to be there's a lot of jokes. There's a lot more jokes than they normally let me write. Like nowadays, I started out writing jokes and comedy and stuff. And nowadays, I tend to be, the guy they call for the serial killer murder adaptation of Batman, or, the closeted gay superhero in the 40s coming to terms with himself and his life. There's not a lot of room for comedy in those, but I still try to find it.
Tim, our very last question. Is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming appearances? Any new projects? The Eisner?
What I do want to talk about, 2 things I want to talk about. Number 1, DC Pride 2025. It's the first time I've ever contributed to DC Pride. They asked me to do it this year, and the reason is because they wanted the whole thing to be one large story. And so they asked me to write a story that threads together all the short stories, and it's a spiritual sequel, as it were, to the Alan Scott book, So it features Alan, it features the Crimson Flame and the Emerald Flame and all of that lore that you got from the Alan Scott book. And so that's going to be in the DC Pride book this year, which is out on June 4th. So please check that out. But here's the big thing I want to talk about. Regarding the Eisner Awards, yes, we got nominated for an Eisner Award, and that is so cool. Best limited series, Alan Scott, the Green Lantern. I hope anybody who's watching will vote for us, but there's some really great nominees as well. So vote for what you think should take the prize home. Here's what I didn't know, and I feel like an absolute idiot about. I didn't know that I could vote for the Eisners. Because I always know they make an announcement about who the judges are. I didn't know that the judges only determine who the nominees are going to be. And then people who work in the business and in the industry are the ones who vote on who's going to win the award. So this is the first time I ever voted. So I imagine there's got to be some other people out there like me who didn't know that it's accessible to you if you work in and around the comic book industry, if you're a creator, if you work for a publisher, if you're an editor, if you are a librarian or a historian or a retailer, you're potentially eligible to vote. So you go to Comic-Con website. I think it's the comic-con.org. They have an awards tab, and under the Eisner section, there's a link to go to like a 1-page or 2-page little form, a couple of little fields to fill out. And then you submit it, and they'll tell you if you're eligible to vote, and they send you a link with a ballot. And so you can just vote online. It's all super easy and super fast. And so I got to vote for the first time. Well, I mean, I could have voted before, but I didn't know. So this is my public service announcement to everybody. There's so much great stuff in comics this year, last year. There's so much great stuff nominated this year. Get out there. If you think you're eligible, submit that form. Maybe get a ballot and vote for your favorite stuff. Let's celebrate an incredible year in comics.
Fantastic. And so the deadlines to vote, you know when the deadlines to vote?
Well, I think this drops on the 29th of May, right? So that is
yes, sir.
Today is the last day for you to register to vote. So if you think you can register, if you want to try to, if you think, I work in the business, maybe I can vote for the Eisners. Today, you got to do it right now. Go to that website, go to Comic-Con's website and click on that link. Now you've got another week that you can vote for the awards. So I think voting ends at like midnight on June 5th. So for the actual awards. So yeah, today, go register to vote.
Well, I'm going to see if I'm eligible, man. I didn't know that. You can drop science on me right now. That's cool. Tim, thank you so much for joining us, man. Always an excellent interview. I love having you on. And just know you always have a home here on the 6 Layer Station.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun, you guys. Thanks.
Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is 6 Layers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Tim Sheridan. We are out. Peace.
6 Layers.